So, yeah, just who I am and how I'm standing in a hole on Norfolk Island. The first part of my career was I studied horticulture first, and as I've been sharing with Philip, I worked for local government for probably about 10 or 12 years. And then I always thought soil was the most interesting part of my work in local government. And then I thought, well, I want to know more about this mysterious world of soil. So I went and did some postgraduate studies in soil and shifted into primary production. So I started working for the New South Wales state government, and then I worked for the Tasmanian state government and then the Victorian state government. And then I went into consulting, and I opened an office for a New South Wales soil consultancy in Melbourne back in 2014, and I ran that for about 7 years. And then I thought there was a lot of that work was in urban horticulture, but I wanted to kind of get back into primary production. And when when I did my thesis as part of my postgraduate work, it was in biological properties of soil, and my major interest has always been organic matter, and I'm not really sure why, other than some kind of sense that was where it was at. And all the work that I've done since has confirmed that was one of the few good decisions I've made in my life. Marrying my wife and having kids and studying organic matter, probably in that order. So back then there was all this interest in biological agriculture, and some people got very excited about that. In fact, I remember going to an event that was run on South Coast New South Wales, probably at the height of interest in biological agriculture, and after it was kind of an award ceremony, and at the end of this, people started singing this song about biological agriculture, which was pretty terrible. But anyway, that was an example of the excitement that was around at the time. In line with that excitement, though, there was a lot of people that were really turned off by the whole idea, particularly the conventional growers who thought, oh, you're saying I'm wrong. And so there was a parting of the ways. And around that time too, there was sustainable agriculture, there was low input sustainable agriculture, there was ecological agriculture. So all of these movements, if you like, that were looking for a better way to do agriculture, to grow food, etc. And they've all kind of come and gone. They had, adherence for a while, and then things changed. We've got regenerative agriculture now, and regenerative agriculture seems to be sticking. And when I decided to get back into focus more on primary production, I decided to call my business Regen Soils, because irrespective of what side of the fence you stand on, there's really little doubt that our soils need regeneration. We have been treating our soils so badly for so long. There are really quite dire predictions around about the future of our productive potential. And the UN have said the 60 harvests left in our soils, the way we're managing them at the moment. That's unbelievable. Like, why are people not out in the streets, jumping up and down about this? These soils have evolved over millions of years. Millions of years. It hurts my brain to think about it. And what I'm going to be talking about today is really how to try to get our head around that ancient evolutionary product that we're dealing with now, and how to manage it with appropriate sympathy and humility, really. So. Because it is, soil is probably the most complex ecosystem on the planet. It makes the Amazon rainforest look like a simple system. And there's so much we still don't understand about soil, but there's so much that we do understand about soil. And so what I'm keen to do is take what we do understand about soil and the principles that guide us in our soil management, which really are good soil management practices. You know, when we talk, people go, oh, what's regenerative agriculture? Actually, regenerative agriculture is just very good land management practices. And what it does is it prioritizes the soil. So when I say to people, you know, what kind of farmer are you? They'll go, oh, I'm a beef grower, or I'm a cereal grower, or I'm a apple grower, or tomato grower. And that's fine. Well, actually, that's what you sell. But what kind of farmer do you need to be to sell those products? Well, if you're a beef producer, you need to be a grass grower, a pasture grower, and you need to be a bloody good pasture grower. But if you want to be a good pasture grower, really you have to be a good root grower, because that's where it's at. It starts with the soil. So we want to make sure that the soil is able to grow the biggest root that we can ask it to grow, because if we can get that, then everything else is going to look after itself, pretty much. So all of the things that, you know, that I only caught the end of Graham's talk yesterday, but I know what he talks about. It's really all about creating the conditions for the plant to grow. So I thought the couple of sessions that I have today are really about helping you to understand what it is you're managing and how to manage it to get the best out of it. A lot of what Graham talked about, I think yesterday, is, you know, getting the mineral balance of the soil right, and that's important, and that's you know, really important. If we want to grow bulk crops, then we certainly need to have lots of nutrient in there for them. But one of the mistakes that we've made in modern agriculture is we have just focused on nutrient. So if you go and get a soil test done by a kind of conventional agronomist, the first thing they're going to do is look at the NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium status of the soil test. And because they're thinking, what nutrients do I need to put on this crop to make it grow? And the word I should emphasize there is make it grow. So we're in the business in agriculture of making things grow. Well, did we make these things grow? No, they kind of did it by themselves. And you know, if we succeed in wiping ourselves out, which we're trying very hard to do at the moment, you know, nature will keep growing. So what we want to do is just help nature to grow, or to tweak things a little bit so that nature helps us grow what we want to grow. And if we can understand that there's the processes are already there or already in place to help us grow what we want to grow, it's an awful lot easier to work with those rather than work against them and come in and say, I'm just going to throw lots of nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium at this and make it grow, and not really think about how the soil can actually help that process. Because when we dump a whole heap of nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium and everything else on the soil, we're shutting down the processes that used to do that for free, and now we're paying for our production in that way. So what we need is some kind of balance. Obviously we want to produce big crops. We want to be able to do that profitably so that we can stay on the land, but we want to increase the natural capital of the soil, so we want to improve the soil as we go rather than degrade it. So I thought we'd start with a soil pit today. And soil pits are really great to get an understanding of the full soil profile. So again, you know, one of the sins of modern agriculture, and I was schooled in this system, so I know it well. You know, we were taught that the top 10 centimeters of the soil is really where you need to concentrate, because that's where most of the roots are. So that's where you put the fertilizer on the top of the soil, because that's where it's going to be taken up, blah, blah, blah. We were never encouraged to think about, well, what's below the top 10 centimeters? And there's a lot below the top 10 centimeters. So yes, the top 10 centimeters are really important because that's where most of the feeder roots are going to be. But if we have issues with water management, as we do just about anywhere in Australia, the water is down here. The water in the top 10 centimeters runs out extremely quickly. So even in the droughts that you've had here on the island, you know, did this tree go brown? Probably not. right? Because it was able to access water from somewhere, because it had to. If it wasn't able to access water, it wouldn't still be here. So they're getting water from deeper down. So our thinking now in agricultural systems is how do we manage that in the context of what we're growing? Now that's a bit of a challenge, because a lot of what we're growing is quite shallow rooted or is relatively short lived, especially in terms of vegetables. So how do we manage water relations in the soil? How do we maintain the soil's capacity to hold water? And that's really what we want to look at today. So opening up a hole like this starts helping us to think about what is going on below the top 10 centimeters and how do we manage that. So I might get everyone to kind of come around on this side here, and we'll talk about some of the things that we're looking at and that we want to explore. What you've got here on Norfolk Island is a soil type called ferrosol, and the Australian soil classification is a very boring document. It classifies soils based on their physical and chemical properties. It doesn't classify them on their biological properties because that's just too hard at this stage. So our taxonomic system looks at things like soil texture, soil pH, levels of salt in the soil, and behaviors of those soils. So ferrosol is one of the soil orders in the Australian soil classification system, and it's probably fair to say it's the best. It's the best because it's the most productive. If you go to other parts of Australia with ferrosol soils, and there's not very many of them, there's an area in Queensland, but probably the most productive part of the country is the northern part of Tasmania. And if anyone's visited there and travelled between, say, Launceston and Devonport and further west, you see all these beautiful landscapes with soil this colour and redder and even darker. And these are all ferrosol soils, and they're pretty bulletproof. And what makes them special is their red colour. And the reason they have a red colour is because they have a high proportion of iron oxides in the soil. Now, iron it's a trace element from a plant nutrient point of view, but when we have it in high proportion in the soil, it contributes enormously to soil structure. So soil structure is one of the physical properties of soil that is fundamentally important to how soils work. So what soil structure is, in very simple terms, is the arrangement of solids and voids in the soil. And the reason that we need voids in the soil is because that's how soils drain. But most importantly, it's how soils breathe. And so we tend not to think too much about soils needing to breathe. But if we think that in a teaspoon of healthy soil, there's more organisms than humans that have ever lived on the planet, most of those organisms are aerobic, which means they breathe in oxygen and they breathe out carbon dioxide just like we do. So for the soil microbial population to be healthy, it's got to have a really adequate supply of moisture, of oxygen, and it needs to be able to outgas carbon dioxide. So where we have a nice intact soil profile that hasn't been cultivated, all of the organisms in the soil are working to maintain this structure. So think of it as this giant underground community of miners. They have to be able to get air from the surface, and they have to be able to discharge their wastes. So they're busy constructing mine shafts all over the place so that water can run through. There's little shafts off those mine shafts where they live. It's like a little housing development off the main road. And the preservation of this system is vital for all of that life. Now, if we come along and we cultivate that soil and we put a plough through it, all of that pore structure is going to be destroyed and the soil collapses down upon itself again. Now, if you just have an ordinary sandy soil, maybe that's not much of a problem, because sandy soil is a bit like marbles in a jar. They're big particles and there's automatically spaces between them, and air and water can flow through a sandy soil quite easily. But if it's a clayey soil, the particles are so tiny, they'll pack down together. There's very little spaces between them, and so air and water movement is impeded in that soil. This is a clayey soil, but it's got a very high proportion of iron oxides in it. And what the iron oxides do is they form extra bridging structures in the soil to maintain a soil structure that's a bit more like a sandy soil. So it's got much larger spaces, in effect, a lot more micropores that will facilitate the aggregation of soil, the clumping of soil together, and spaces then around those little aggregates will allow aeration and drainage. So this is why these soils are so special, because even though they're a clay soil, their structure is more similar to a sandy soil. But being a clay soil, they've got more nutrient and water holding capacity than a sandy soil does. So this is why we've got the best of both worlds with a ferrosol soil. Now, there's positives and negatives to that. One of the, when we were on, I can't remember whose farm we were on yesterday, late yesterday afternoon. Is it? Right. He did say that after a heavy rain shower, he can see that the plants lose a bit of nutrition. Remember him saying that they look a little bit washed out. And part of the reason for that is, in spite of the fact that these are clay soils and they have such good drainage, they can lose nutrient quite quickly. Because even though clay soils have a high nutrient holding capacity, it's called cation exchange capacity, these soils, the clay in these soils, has a relatively low cation exchange capacity, which is all a little bit counterintuitive. What that means is they're not great at holding on to nutrient, and it means that they can lose nutrient quite easily. So this information has really got to be packaged together so that we end up saying, okay, well, there's positives and there's negatives and there's strengths and there's weaknesses. How can we balance these all together so that we can maintain the fertility in the system to allow our year-round production? And the secret to it is organic matter, because organic matter has got a really high cation exchange capacity. So cation exchange capacity is measured in these obscure units called centimoles of positive charge per kilogram of soil. Basically what it means is you've got the analogy that I often use is like you've got a bookcase, and it's full of books, and the books are on things like calcium and magnesium and potassium and sulfur. So you need to have all of these books to have a complete bookshelf. It's a bit like an encyclopedia. You know, you have to have 24 books in the whole set, otherwise you've got some information missing, right? And that means there's going to be gaps in your knowledge. So if you haven't got all of the elements that we need, the macro and micro elements in our bookshelf, there's going to be a gap, potentially a weakness in our production system. And you know, Bron mentioned that you know, boron is limiting in these soils, and phosphorus can be limiting in these soils as well. So if we haven't got those, they're going to limit. You can have as much nitrogen and potassium and everything else as you like, but if those things are limiting, it's going to limit the whole show. The cation exchange capacity of these soils might only be 8 or 10 units, which means it's quite a small bookcase. But the cation exchange capacity of organic matter might be 300 centimoles, which means it's 30 times greater than the nutrient holding capacity of the organic matter is 30 times greater than the clay. Now there's a lot more clay than there is organic matter, but it does show that the organic matter punches way above its weight in terms of its nutrient holding capacity, and bearing in mind it's got other functions in the soil as well. It's got major water holding capacity, It's got a major role in soil structure, so it helps to reinforce that pore network that I talked about. But most importantly, it is the primary energy source in the soil. It's pretty much what all the bugs in the soil eat at various stages. So if we want to support big microbial communities, we want to have lots of organic matter, which means lots of fresh inputs of organic matter, because the creatures that are there now, they're gobbling away that organic matter, they're running it down, they're eating it. So we've got to constantly make sure we've got more going in to keep them fed, to sustain those high populations. Any questions or thoughts or comments at this stage? Give me a chance to draw my breath.
But with the organic matter, does that mean grow more crops to then put them back into the soil and more trees where the leaves fall and
Yep.
not have bare ground?
Definitely not have bare ground. You know, I say soils were never meant to be bared, right? Soils nature covers soils as quick as anything. If there's a bare soil, what does nature do? It chucks a weed in, to us it's a weed. To nature, it's quick put a hat on, do something. So in the same way that if we go around without our shirt on, our skin is going to get very damaged very quickly. The soil gets damaged if it's exposed to the sun, because it gets solarized. You know, the part of the reason that top 10 centimeters of the soil is also so important is because it's the entry pathway for so much organic matter and nutrients. So a bird does a poop in the tree, it lands on the surface of the soil. A cow, the same. The plants that we're walking on, we break a stem, it lands on the surface of the soil. The pasture gets grazed, roots die back to maintain that balance between tops and bottoms. So yes, the top 10 centimeters is where most of the food is in the soil. It's also the most highly oxygenated part of the soil, because there's less impediment to oxygen getting to the top 10 centimeters than a meter down. We'll talk about that in a minute. So that's where most of the population live. It's like in Australia, most of the population lives on the coast because it's the most amenable environment for us. But if we have a tsunami, or if we have with global warming, if we have sea level rise, well, we're going to suffer. So same way, if we bare the soil, most of the population is in that vulnerable zone, and it's going to cook. So
sorry, I was just going to ask, I mean, surely there's organic matter and organic matter,
there's organic matter and organic matter?
Yeah.
Totally. Well, it's like, we don't eat just steak, we don't eat just potatoes. We have a balanced diet, and we need to have a range of food sources. It's all food. So yes, you're quite right, organic matter is all organic matter, but there's big differences in the kind of organic matter that we're supplying, and it's all important. So in simple terms, we've classified organic matter into 3 pools, if you like. One is called the labile pool, which is also called particulate organic matter. The next pool is humus, also called passive organic matter or slow turnover organic matter. And then the third pool is called recalcitrant, used to be called inert, but it's not inert, we know now, organic matter. That third pool, that really resistant stuff, is generally a product of fire. So you'll know that there's a lot of interest at the moment in biochar, for example, and that's because burning, particularly under a low oxygen environment, pyrolysis, which produces biochar, produces these chemical ring structures in the organic matter that makes it highly resistant to microbial attack and microbial degradation. Because bear in mind, it's microbes that are degrading, if you like, that are consuming this. So it's microbes that are eating the humus, it's microbes that are eating the particulate organic matter. So in simple terms, if I was to break off a leaf and drop it on the ground, well, it'd be gone in, you know, a week to a month, right? There'd be really nothing left. And that's because the food in a leaf is highly available. So that means bacteria and fungi will get stuck into that really quickly and will consume it really quickly and will bring it into their bodies and into the soil. If a tree drops a branch, that's not going to degrade so quickly. Part of the reason for that is because bacteria haven't really got the teeth to get stuck into a big lump of wood, and that's where fungi come into their own. So soil fungi have a role, many roles, but one of the key roles that fungi have is breaking down much more resistant compounds. The kind of resistant compounds we find in wood, even the kind of resistant compounds we find in this stem of the plant. So there's more lignans and polyphenols in this than there is in that. So that's going to go really quickly. So that would be, you know, that would go into the labile pool or the particulate organic matter pool, whereas some of this will, but some of this, you know, may need fungi to break it down because there's going to be more resistant plant compounds in here. It just means that it takes longer for the microbes to break it down. Now the beauty of this, of course, nature designed, is that fast food, medium food, and then slower food from the, so it means that there's a constant supply of food of all these different forms coming through the system at any one time. And there's all of these agents in the soil, millions of bacteria, you know, kilometers of fungi, and that's what they're doing. While we're standing here gabbling on, they're just doing their thing that they've evolved to do over millions of years. They're just getting on with it. And they're cycling nutrients. They're basically passing the parcel between each other. And then when we get down to, you know, the magic humus, all humus is a product that's been through the bodies of many organisms, and you end up with a very complex molecule that becomes harder and harder to extract more nutrient out of, but that very complex molecule is what has that really big cation exchange capacity, is able to hold on to other nutrients for plant availability, and contributes to, you know, soil structure and all of those other really good things. So you're right, organic matter ain't organic matter. So even if you're using compost, for example, composts ain't composts, because you can take a compost that's 6 weeks old, it looks a bit composty, and you can put it on your garden and it will do good things. It'll primarily feed the microbes because it's quite young. It hasn't developed, it's mostly particulate organic matter. It hasn't developed through to a high level of humus. But if you let that same compost go for 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, it's going to become much more soil-like, isn't it? And that's where we have a much higher proportion of humus in that soil, and that's going to do a different job than the fresher material. All right. Any other comments on that? So in terms of how to manage that, you know, how to manage your soil organic matter input, this is where green manure cropping, especially in a vegetable production system, is super important. Part of the reason it's super important, sorry, I'm going to put my hat on now because the sun's come around. Remember I was saying before that in spite of these soils' strengths, they haven't got great nutrient holding capacity. They've got okay nutrient holding capacity, but there is that vulnerability, particularly under very heavy rain, to lose nutrient. And it's not all nutrient that they're losing, it's nutrients that the soil has difficulty holding onto. So I don't want to get too technical here, but when we talk about cation exchange capacity, a cation is a positively charged ion. So things like calcium, magnesium, potassium, and a bunch of others are positively charged. The clay has got a negative charge, So the cation exchange capacity is how many negative charges there are on that clay that can grab these positive ions and hold on to them. Great, that works really well. But when we look at things like nitrates and sulfates and boron and phosphates, they're anions. They're negatively charged ions. A negatively charged clay cannot hold on to a negatively charged ion. You need a positive charge in the soil to hold on to a negatively charged ion.
I heard a radio interview where the people were using chemicals on their pasture and whatever, and it killed all the mushrooms. So and things like that. There used to be field mushrooms everywhere. So is that why that's happened? Is it because the two positives rather than a positive and a negative?
No, that's a different reason, and I'll come back to your question. The reason that it can't hold on to the cation exchange capacity is a little bit like when you got static on your jumper and dust sticks to it, right? So you've got a slight electrical charge on your jumper and the dust will stick to that electrical charge. And that's a little bit like the way the cations are held onto the negative charge on the clay. Organic matter, the humus fraction of organic matter, has got mostly negative charges, but it has a good proportion of positive charges as well. So it has anion exchange capacity as well as cation exchange capacity. That means the organic matter can hold on to those negative ions like nitrates, sulfates, phosphates, boron, etc. So if you haven't got much organic matter in your soil, there's nothing to hold on to those really important elements. So when you get a big kind of thunderstorm and you get a lot of rain falling at one time, there's a flushing, there's a leaching of the soil where those elements just disappear deeper down below the root zone, gone. So these plants will pick them up. When you've got lots of vegetation around, they're not going into the sea, which is a good thing, but they're not going into your plant, which is a bad thing. So the focus on these soils, which can hold a lot of organic matter, needs to be maintaining that high level of organic matter so that we have some resistance to the loss of those really important nutrients. Getting back to your question about why we're not seeing the field mushrooms and why that's just a pure two things. One is salt toxicity. So there was a dairy farmer I worked with in Tasmania, and if you go to your local agronomy store and say, I need to put some potassium on my soil, they'll say, here you go, here's a bag of muriate of potash, which is potassium chloride, 49% potassium, 51% chloride. What's chloride? Salt. Do plants need chloride? Yeah, a tiny bit. It's like we need salt a little bit. I've got my sister-in-law is a bit of a health freak, and she was really anti-salt, and she started getting all these cramps on her legs, and she went to a naturopath, and the naturopath said, I'm going to give you a drink. Gave her a glass of water and said, can you taste, what do you taste? And she said, oh, water. There was a teaspoon of salt in that water, and she couldn't taste it because she was so salt deficient. So we need a bit of salt, but if we have too much salt, we kill ourselves. Same with plants. Brassica is a really good example. Brassica needs a higher level of sodium than most plants, but you give it too much sodium, it'll kill it, right? But when we put on, and what this dairy farmer did, he applied potassium chloride. He said there was a heavy rain event that night. He came out the next morning, he reckoned he'd killed every worm on his farm. That was the last time he used potassium chloride. The other form of potassium that's commonly available is potassium sulfate. It's only got about 41% potassium in it, but it's got about, I think it's about 15 or 16% sulfur in it as well, which is also a really valuable element. And potassium sulfate is more of a health-giving, it's a natural product, it's mined, but it's more of a health-giving product to the soil, whereas potassium chloride is potentially toxic to the soil and to soil organisms. So one reason why the fungi are dying is just salt toxicity. The other reason is redundancy. So when I was saying before about how ancient the evolution of soil is. What I'm really talking about are the mutualistic, symbiotic relationships that exist in soil. So I think you probably know that there's a deal that goes on in soil where plants feed the soil and the soil feeds the plant. So how that happens is the plant, through the miracle of photosynthesis, makes sugar from carbon dioxide and water and sunlight. A lot of that sugar it uses to grow its own biomass, but a large proportion of the sugar it pushes out through its roots into the soil. And the reason it does that is because it is tapping into the vast underground market. And that market will provide the plant anything that it wants. But at the same time, the plant's root system is not able to access its own needs. So it has to tap into this much broader market, which is accessing a much larger part, a much larger area of the soil, and so is able to pull in nutrient from outside of the reach of the plant roots. So it's a beautiful system. It's a highly intelligent system. It's a very deliberative system. There's nothing accidental about it. And there's been some beautiful research that demonstrates that two-way directional bi-control that exists between the plants and the organisms. So what it means is this tree here is getting all the nutrient that it needs because it's tapped into this vast underground market that is accessing what the tree needs. And the tree is supporting the underground market because it's pumping all this carbohydrate into the soil. Okay? We come along and we go, without any real knowledge or understanding of that, we say, I'm going to grow wheat. I'm going to grow one plant that's only got a single root architecture, that's only got a limited number of exudates that are going into the soil, and I'm going to make it grow. Remember, how do we make it grow? By getting a bag of fertilizer and chucking that fertilizer on, right? So ordinarily that wheat plant would put out roots and it would put signals into the soil saying, hey, fungi, I'm here and this is what I need. Bacteria, I'm here and this is what I need. So plants put signals into the soil to wake up the workforce if the workforce aren't already awake, and to establish those relationships. That's what happens when the wheat plant is growing wild or in an organic system. But if we come along and we dump a whole heap of NP, K, S, whatever else on that, the plant goes, it's raining food. I don't need to tap into the local market because the food's coming to me and I'm awash with it. So the fungus is there going, ready to serve you, plant. And the plant goes, sorry buddy, don't need you. No carbohydrate for you today. So the fungus shrivels up and goes back and forms a resting spore and just goes, okay, I'm redundant. I haven't got a job. I'm just going to sit at home and do nothing. So they die out. Surprise, surprise. So what regenerative agriculture is about is saying, okay, I still need to grow 5 tons of wheat, but there's all these willing workers in the soil that's going to help my wheat to grow. How do I get them working at full capacity and yet make sure there's enough nutrient in the system to get my 5 tons of wheat? That's what regenerative agriculture is. It's about finding that balance and saying, how can I put that nutrient on in a way that's not going to make these guys go to sleep? And the main way I can put that on is putting it on in a form that feeds them, not the plant. So you know the old maxim of the organic growers that says feed the soil, not the plant? That's why. Because if we feed the soil, if we fertilize the fungi and the bacteria, the plants are going to get all the food they need. And we'll grow big populations of microorganisms and we'll have healthy soil. It's that easy.
If we sort of boron deficient here, then maybe our microbes on this island don't actually want boron.
Why do you think that?
Well, because if you, I mean, how do we know that the microbes here are the same as the microbes elsewhere?
Well, they're probably not. It's the same way as like there's people here and there's people in Mongolia. We behave differently, we look different, we eat different things, but we're all people. So here we might have quite different bacteria to the bacteria they have in Mongolia or the bacteria they have in Sydney. But they're all working in a similar way. They're all working in association with the local plant community. Now, I think probably a better answer to your question is, before humans came along here, there was obviously enough boron in the system to sustain what was probably very thick vegetation. And this is another very important aspect of property of these soils. So you've all heard that we globally have a huge problem because much of the Amazon is being cut down. We're continuing to cut the Amazon down for beef farming. But you may also have heard that the pastures that replace the rainforest are good usually for kind of 1 to 3 years, and then they get completely clapped out and they have great difficulty growing pastures and the land is kind of ruined. And that's because in those systems, if I walk into the uncleared part of that Amazon rainforest and I say, where is the fertility in this system? The fertility is not in the soil. The fertility is in the standing biomass. So a branch falls out of a big tree and there's a little bit of boron in that branch and it hits the ground, the microbes invade that. Well, the bigger things invade it first, the borers and things like that, but basically the ecosystem attacks that because their job is to cycle the nutrients out of that as quickly as possible. And because there's such a mass of roots underneath that piece of wood from all the standing vegetation, those nutrients don't go very far before they're whipped up into a microbe and supplied back up into the tree. So we come along and we go, we want to farm here, so we clear all the vegetation. We might burn a lot of it, whatever. We've got a porous soil. Boron's an anion. It leaches down through the soil. And we come along and we try and grow our plant cultivars that have a high nutrient requirement, and suddenly there's no boron for them. And so we've got to replace it somehow. So one of the ways we'll replace it is with compost. Is a really good way because there will be a certain amount of boron in compost. We can also put on boron fertilizer if we need to. But if and I've got no problem with any fertilizer. Well, I've got no problem with fertilizing. I do have problems with some fertilizers. But we can put boron on, but now we've got to make sure that that boron stays here. So a certain amount is going to leave in the tomatoes that we sell, for example, or the cabbages that we eat. But knowing that boron is a leachable element, and by that it means it's a bit of a Houdini element. It's going to try and escape the system. My focus comes back onto organic matter as the only thing that's going to stop that boron leaving the system by any pathway other than through something I'm going to eat or sell. Right?
Well, considering that Norfolk, since the volcanoes was kind of undisturbed rainforest a couple of 100 years ago, it was cut down and some areas have been planted since with much more shallow-rooted crops. How important is it as part of that rotation or in part of the growing area to have deep-rooted plants still there to get the deeper nutrients and to break the soil up and to get the water down?
Did everybody hear the question? Yeah, so how important is it, like now that we've changed the system and we're growing mainly shallow rooted plants, how important is it to get, you know, to have plants that are growing deep down? Super important. Let's have a look at what we've found here. So as you can see, there's not a whole lot of, you know, we've got ground cover, which is probably, and that's an interesting thing, you know, we've probably got, how much ground cover do you reckon we've got? Give me a percentage on what you reckon is here.
50, 60%.
Yeah, that'll be a good estimate. Probably only about 50%, which means about 50% of the soil here is bare.
And if you mowed it, you'd even have less.
Well, actually what we're trying to do is assess what's, yeah, but anyway. So we've got relatively low ground cover, so we've only got, well, firstly from a kind of plant, if this was a pasture, for example, where we're trying to grow a feed for animals, we're really only using 50% of the plant. No criticism on Bron here, I know that this is not a managed area. She's probably just mowing it to keep it kind of tidy. But so that's the first thing. We want to have high ground, we want to have 100% ground cover year round. Super important, like never bare the soil. Soil should never see the sun. But what we want to look at is the rooting depth from what's here. Now, interestingly, just where I'm looking at here is mainly this horrible stuff called couch grass. And why is it horrible? Because it defies us, doesn't it? You know, we usually don't like it. We definitely don't like it in our productive systems. And it's so hard to get rid of. Why is it so hard to get rid of? Well, I reckon these are couch roots down here, and of course they got super tough rhizomes and everything else, so it's very difficult to get rid of. But what I wanted to show you in opening up a soil pit is, you know, and you will know this from holes that you've dug yourselves and cuttings that you've seen, you know, around the island, but we have real difference in soil properties as we go down through the profile. So this top part of the soil profile here is, you know, it's really quite loose, and you know, when we describe the texture of this soil or the structure of this soil, you know, we would describe it as friable, right? And friable means that it forms these small little aggregates. The bigger aggregates break up really easily. It's cool, it's moist, but most importantly, you see that there's a massive surface area on this soil sample here compared to, you know, something like that, for example, which comes from down the bottom of the profile. You know, roots are not going to be able to grow through that as easily as they'll grow through that. So that means there's almost no part of that soil that is not accessible to a plant root, or more importantly to a fungus, that's going to extend a great big hyphal network out through that material and connect to a plant, and so improve the use of that soil, you know, many times more than the plant root is able to by itself. So if we have poor soil structure, if we have an area that's been compacted because of cultivation by machinery, stock in wet weather, vehicular traffic, you know, the soil is going to look more like that. It's going to be squashed. So all of those voids in the soil that exist between all those nice little friable particles, all those voids where the air is and where the water runs through the drainage, they've been squashed. So this is a bit like you know, when an earthquake comes along and smashes up a building, the building kind of falls down on top of itself, and well, there's no room to stand up in that building anymore, is there? And that's what happens. The microbes can't stand up anymore. There's no room for them. No air, no space, not much room for root development, and so we have really poor soil structure. But up in the top here we got beautiful soil structure, and so, you know, if we had a lot of plants here, and certainly you can see that there's you know, really quite a lot of root matter in this top 10 centimeters, this small little area here. So when you think our focus is on the top 10 centimeters, when we're farming, this is what we're thinking about, but gee, look at all the soil that's underneath that. Like, that's crazy. Why would you just think about the top 10 centimeters? Well, all we're really doing in testing the top 10 centimeters is, if you like, we're assessing the potential of that soil. Because if there's that much nutrient in the top 10 centimeters, you know, it means it's hard to measure how much nutrient is in the rest of the soil, but as an indication of the size of the bank and the potential to feed the plant, that gives us a pretty good indication of how much nutrient is likely available in the system, because that's where most of it is going to be anyway. But there's still going to be a lot of nutrient deeper down. So when the nitrates leach, when the phosphates leach, when the boron leaches, this is where it's going. Now, if we've got roots that cut out here and the nitrates are down here, so typically in cereal production systems, you know, in mainland Australia where we're growing wheat and, you know, thousands of hectares of wheat and barley and whatever else, they'll do what's called a deep end test at the start of the year. So they'll take a sample from usually 60 centimeters. So they'll take a sample from here and they're testing that for nitrates. Because the wheat roots, if there's no impediment to deeper rooting in that system, the wheat roots will get down to 60 centimeters and they'll pick that nitrate up. And so the agronomists allow for that in their nutrient budgets. So they'll say, okay, there's that much nitrate down there. That means we can subtract that from the amount of fertilizer that we're going to put on. So we're doing this very much by feel. So when we're going down here, you know, we've got this really nice, you see it's still really loose. Some of the particles are getting just a little bit bigger, but they're still very, very loose. And we get down here and I'm feeling that things are tightening up just a little bit here. And also you can see at this level, I'm getting a bit of a change in color and I'm getting a little bit of a change in texture. So this is telling me that, look at that, I've got about 250 millimeters of really good quality topsoil. So 250 millimeters of topsoil is a lot. And 250 millimeters of good quality topsoil means there's not much that you can't grow in soil like this, providing that its chemistry is amenable and providing that we've got sufficient mineral nutrient in the soil. So we go down a little bit lower below this mark here and we see that the soil is breaking up into kind of larger pieces like that. And what this is telling me is that the soil clay content is increasing. So this is the fun part. This is where we get to get our hands dirty. So to get a handle on how much, you know, so sorry, just to backtrack, can anyone tell me what soil is made up of?
Sand, clay, and organic.
Yeah, there's another silt. Exactly. Sand, silt and clay. Very good. Sand, silt and clay, that's the mineral component of the soil, right? And all soils are made up of sand, silt and clay, that's it. But it's the form of sand, the size of sand, the amount of silt, the size of the silt, and the amount of clay and the type of clay that makes differences between soils. So one of the ways that we figure out how much sand, silt and clay we have in our soil is doing a hand texture assessment. And so what... A poo test? Well, no, a poo test is a little bit different. I've done one of them. It might look like a poo test. So what we're doing is we're taking a bit of soil, and I've just added a tiny bit too much water, so I want to take a little bit more from the same soil depth. Because what I want to do is I want to feel, well, I want to see what I can feel in the sample. So I want to see, can I feel sand? And you know, if there's sand in here, I should be able to feel it because it's coarse, it's gritty, and it can even, if there's a lot of sand, you can hear it. You can hear the sand particles rubbing against each other. If there's a lot of silt in the system, in the soil, you get a much soapier kind of feeling to the sample. And if there's a lot of clay in the soil, you can have a sticky feeling or a smooth, silky kind of texture to the soil. So I'm at the right moisture content now, and I'm just kneading this through so that I have real uniform moisture throughout the whole thing. So now what I want to do is first thing is I want to see, can I feel any sand in it? So I'm going to push it between my thumb and forefinger like this. Now I've got to be able to distinguish this. There can be tiny bits of gravel in here, but there also can be tiny little bits of drier clay that I've yet to break up, which is why sometimes you need to massage these samples for quite a while to break up all these small little bits. But I can feel a little bit of grittiness in here, which tells me that there is some sand in this sample. Well, there's always sand, but there is a reasonable proportion of sand in this sample. I'm not feeling very much soapiness to this sample, so that's suggesting to me that the silt content is not that high. And silt is basically just, very, very, very fine sand.
So the sand content in this situation would have come from decomposing basalt. So there's some particles that haven't totally decomposed.
Precisely. Exactly. Yeah.
Not sand as in sand on.
Well, yeah. Well, like what is sand? Sand is just kind of small bits of, and it depends.
Here is small bits of shells.
Yeah, that's right. So down the beach, that sand is from shells. So that'll be a calcium carbonate sand. In other places, you'll have a quartz sand. Other places, you'll have a granitic sand. So yeah, it all depends on what the parent material is. So there's a certain amount of sand in here, not a whole lot of silt. Certainly there's a lot of clay, and I can tell there's a lot of clay just because of how kind of malleable this sample is. So there's a couple of ways to determine how much clay is in it. One is to make a clay ball like that, and then just compress it like that and see how much compression it takes before we see it beginning to crack. So you can see there's cracks beginning to open up there. So I've been able to depress that quite a way. So this is telling me that because clay particles are very small and they'll hang on to each other very well, there's high adherence within the sample itself. The other way is we want to see how long of a ribbon we can make. So if I push the soil out again between thumb and forefinger like this, how long a ribbon can I make before it breaks? So I'm going to try and keep this at a steady, probably 2-3 mil thickness as I push it through. So as you can see, there's a reasonable length of ribbon, but it's about to go, so that broke. So it takes a little bit of practice then to say, okay, well, how does this differ from another soil? How do I categorize this one? So if this was a sandier soil, I wouldn't really be able to make a ribbon at all, because it has no self kind of adhesion. It would just fall apart. If this was a heavy clay soil, it's going to behave like plasticine. It probably won't break at all. I can make a really long ribbon. So again, it just tells us how much of these relative proportions there are in the soil. So knowing that that we've got a reasonable proportion of clay and sand in here, this would texture out as a clay loam. And again, a clay loam is a pretty ideal soil texture for what we want. Now just pass that around if you like, and everyone can have a feel of that. If we do the same down at the bottom of the profile, well, actually, I'll just continue what I was doing here. So we'd gotten down to about 350 or so, breaking the sample up like this. And I'll keep going. And you see there's still roots all the way along here. So this tells me that we've got some soil structure, because if we didn't have soil structure, we wouldn't have a root here. Because the root has to grow through a gap, and the root has to have air to support it all the way down. So I can feel that the soil is tightening up. It's getting, just physically getting harder to put the pick in. And you can see here I'm getting a more distinct change in color again down at this level here. So at about 600, things are getting much paler. Now part of the reason for that is organic matter again has a really strong influence on soil color. So generally the darker the soil, the higher the level of organic matter in the soil. So it's not surprising when we get down to these deeper levels that we're encountering some weathered material. So some material that's kind of, still a bit rocky, but, probably would break open without too much effort. But certainly things are getting a lot tighter down here. And when we get down, when I was down at the bottom here, it was really very tight. But look, a root. So to still have a root down here, you know, from this fairly average vegetation at a metre is really pretty impressive.
Could that be the trees out to the side?
Oh,
Or
look,
above it?
it is possible. And there's really no way of knowing. Yeah, so yeah, it could be even, you know, these trees over here. Like these trees will extend roots out
Like
quite
bigger
a
root
long
down
way.
there at about the 90.
Yeah. So let's just see if this. So even down deep, when I crush that, it still breaks up into really quite nice friable material. But this is probably not going to be as stable a structure as we have in the upper soil here, and that's for reasons of soil chemistry. That's the rock. This is not quite such a healthy poo, this one. I'm reminded I used to have a friend of mine, when she had babies, she was so in love with her babies. She used to tell me that, this is before I had kids, she used to tell me that the baby's poo smelled like apricots.
Did she feed them apricots?
She was breastfeeding,
I was
yes.
going to say, obviously not bottle fed.
So this can be a bit time consuming sometimes to break up all the bits of clay that are in this sample. I'm not sure that he lives down there.
Now, I've been down a couple of coal mines with my son-in-law,
Yeah.
and all the way down there's this big white, it's chalk, and there's coal down, 120, 150 metres, and that's all sediment that's weathered from somewhere else. I find it
Mind-boggling.
mind-boggling.
Yeah,
how
it is.
The length of time and the forces that have taken all one type. It's just the force of the machines to take it out.
I know.
And then in the fullness of time,
We're getting into the Bible here.
no, it breaks it down, and they grow trees and that on it. It's rehabilitate it.
Yeah, I know. It's extraordinary, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
But white.
Well, that white material usually indicates that it's had an extended period of leaching. So basically, everything is washed out of that material. That's really, and often they're very silty or very clay materials. So, and often we find them there. We often find them in this area in the soil here, what's called the A2 horizon, and they can be a real impediment to root growth in some soils because they have no structure. They've got nothing good about them really at all, and they can be really problematic. So you can see with this is a stiffer soil straight away, and we can see that there's a much higher clay content in this. So as we go down through the profile, we would expect to find, in most soils, we'll find more clayey conditions deeper down in the soil. So getting back to what I was saying at the start, if you want to pass that one around, we're in the business of growing roots, right? So the deeper down we can get roots into the system, the healthier our soil is going to be, the more resilient our plants are going to be, the more resistant they're going to be against drought, and the more organic matter we're putting into that soil too deeper down. But if we're just growing tomatoes, well, that's a little bit of a problem, because tomato root system is pretty crappy. So this is where we've got to think about the companion aspect of cropping. And one of the nice things that we saw on the farm yesterday was, you know, they've got lots of interplanting there with you know, non-cash crops, and often it's non-cash crops and perennial plants that we want to see in conjunction with our annual system, because they're the things that are going to keep roots growing year round. So there's a number of principles that we're trying to follow in regenerative agriculture, and some of the more important principles are 100% ground cover 100% of the time, living roots year round, avoiding cultivation, etc. Now, in a vegetable growing situation, we can't necessarily avoid cultivation, and that's why it's really important to make sure that we add organic matter, or make sure there's enough organic matter going in, because really what we're doing is we're saying, okay, sorry guys, we've got to knock down your house, but here's all the bricks and mortar and everything you need to rebuild it straight away. So you demolish the house, but right there's a few trucks with cement and bricks and everything else that's needed, and so in a very short period of time. So like, that's what the difference between you know, the United States and Haiti. They have a tornado going through, they've got the resources to go in and rebuild the suburb, especially if it's a wealthy suburb. But Haiti, they just didn't get the resources to rebuild, and so a lot of those people are still living in shacks, you know, however many years after that big tornado went through the place. So we got to make sure that we provide the currency, the resources for the soil to repair the damage. And one of the best farmers that I ever worked with was an organic grower near where I used to live in South Coast New South Wales. He cultivated all the time, but between every crop was a green manure crop, and he turned that in. That green manure crop would be gone like that because the soil was still so alive. There was so much capacity to break that material down, turn it back into organic matter, and away he'd go again. So green manure crops and he had the same ferrosol soil as you have here. And what that does is it keeps the nutrients, it stops the nutrients from leaching and maintains high biological populations in the soil.
Sorry, could you just say that if you were tilling, then that would be a good way to manage the fact that you're still tilling, you could do the cover crop?
Exactly, yeah, do the cover crop. Or if you haven't got time, like a lot of the commercial veggie growers haven't got time to do cover crops, but they'll use compost instead. That's okay too. It just means you're bringing all the materials in to repair the damage that you've just done, and to allow those populations to bounce back. Just a couple of other things before we finish up. These are a couple of simple tests that we normally do to assess the soil structural integrity of what we're dealing with. So what I've done here is I've taken a sample from the very topsoil, from about 2 inches down. That's this sample here. And I've taken another sample from the bottom of the soil profile, which is this sample here. I've done the same top and bottom here, and I've vigorously shaken these two. What we're looking for here is what happens to the soil when it's suddenly exposed to a lot of fresh water. So in other words, when you have a big rainfall event. Some soils, particularly that have low levels of organic matter or have unbalanced chemistry, will disperse, will basically kind of go milky like this one here. You've probably all seen milky dams in various places where the water just never clears. And that's usually because we've got elevated sodium, or sometimes very elevated magnesium, or even very elevated potassium can help maintain the clay in a dispersed state and stop it ever settling out. But here, our sample is pretty much unaffected by the water. Part of the reason for that, all the things we've been talking about, clay loam soil, high level of organic matter, high level of iron oxides in the soil, holding that structure really well together. So the aggregate is almost untouched by the water. This sample from a meter down, this is called slaking, if you want to have a closer look at this. So there's no cloudiness like there is here, but the aggregate has collapsed. This tells me that there's very low organic matter down at the bottom here. Again, no surprise. But if I was to take that sample from here and this happened, that would be a worry, right? Because I have to have organic matter in my topsoil. There's a lot of organic matter between here and there, but the concentration of it, particularly down the bottom, is going to be, a fraction of what it is up here. And so the sample slakes, so basically it falls apart. That partly explains why we've got this much chunkier soil structure down the bottom here. We've got higher clay content, but we've got less agents that are holding that clay in an aggregated fashion. So it collapses. When I vigorously shake these samples up, I want to see what kind of layering that I'm getting here. So you can see I've got the solids component. So this is the larger component. The silts and clays have settled out here. This is the deeper sample, and I'm kind of interested to see that I've got a higher, or maybe I put more soil into this one, I can't quite remember. I tried to put around the same amount in. But you can see anyway, in the same way, this is the sand and the silt component essentially dropping out quite quickly. And you can see here, remember I was saying there's a higher clay content as we determined by the hand texture assessment, and you can see there's still a much higher clay content here by its color than there is in the topsoil, where some of it in both samples would have settled out, but there's still an awful lot in suspension. So these are useful tests. So normally with these ones you'd leave them for 24 hours. This is a bit early to read these because it takes a long time for the clay to settle out. What we're really trying to see here is will they ever go clear or even semi-clear? So this is semi-clear. If this one was like this after 24 hours, I'd be pretty happy. There's always going to be a little bit of clay that takes forever to settle out, but I want to see the majority of the clay settling out, so I want to see that water getting clearer after a 24-hour period. And the reason it takes so long is because clay particles are so tiny. We talk about sand being 0.2 to 2 millimeters in grain size. We talk about silt being 0.02 to 0.2 millimeters, and clay is 0.002 to 0.02, well, 0.002 and less actually. So they're absolutely tiny. And the reason why they stay in suspension like this is because they're just so small when they're broken apart from each other that it takes gravity a super long time to be able to exert enough control to pull them down. I think that's enough for me.
What did you do? I can't remember what you did with your bottles. Did you just take some soil and add water to it?
That's all I did.
Okay.
So I just took a small granule like that and put it in here and just gently poured water in around it. I tried not to disturb the sample. And the same here. This one slaked almost immediately, which again is unexpected. And then I did the same thing about this is supposed to be a 5-to-1 extract, so about 1 part of soil to 5 parts of water, and shake that up in the jar and monitor how it behaves.
Very interesting.
So what are we going to do this afternoon?
Well, what we're going to do this afternoon is we're going to, like what's left?
Yeah.
This afternoon I'm going to run through this thing called a visual soil assessment, which reminds me, did you
Shovel?
print?
Oh, sorry, no, I will do that before the
Oh, thanks. I sent a bunch of things through to Phil, save me carrying them over. It's a thing called a visual soil assessment, and it allows you to read your soil. So that's why if any of you are coming to the session this afternoon, if you want to bring a cube of soil, a spade wide by a spade wide by a spade deep, and bring it as intactly as you can. It's going to be a little bit unexciting, I think, because you've probably all got a very similar soil type. But I'll run through the process with you anyway, and it helps you, it gives us some tools to be able to read our soil and look at it and say, well, is it good, is it bad, you know, are some better than others? How do I you know, read the difference between these different soils?
With your job, do you then prescribe plant combination to repair the soil?
Yes, I can. I mean, so what I try and do is the science of regenerative agriculture is called agroecology. And agroecology recognizes that farms are ecosystems within broader agricultural landscapes, basically. So we're taking the science of ecology and applying it to an agricultural system. So that means we're looking at the system as a whole. So, you know, if I was managing this this farm, the first thing I would do is get a soil test so that I know what I'm dealing with. So what we've talked about today is very much the physical aspects of the soil, but I can't really tell you what the chemical properties of this soil are without doing some tests on it. And that's as simple as pH and electrical conductivity, but then understanding all the mineral component of the soil, a lot of which Graham talked about you know, when he was here. So the mineral component of the soil then, we'll be looking at that to make sure. So there's two aspects to the mineral component of the soil. One is the soil able to, if you like, stand up straight and do its job? And then the second question is there enough nutrient in that soil to feed the plants? You know, to support the production that we want. Calcium really is you know, an extremely important element for the first part of that. So I say in the same way that calcium is really important for us because it supports our skeleton, it's really good for bone health. Like for us to be able to function, the first thing we have to be able to do is kind of get out of bed in the morning and stand up straight, right? And we need a healthy skeleton to be able to help us do that. So that's like the fundamental health condition that we need. And then after that, we need to think about what nutrients we need to allow us to do what we need to do during the day. Okay, to go about our work. So in the same way, we say we want to know, is the plant got the right, you know, components in it to enable optimal structure so it can stand up straight and do its job? And then what nutrients do we need for it to do the work that we want it to do, which is to grow our plants? So the first thing I'll assess is that structural component of it. Are the components there to optimize air and water movement in the soil? Because that's really the most important thing. If we haven't got that, you can throw as much nitrogen and phosphorus as you like at it and it still won't grow. Or it won't grow, or you'll spend so much money on fertilizer to try and make it grow that you'll grow broke. So we want to put the minimum amount of fertilizer on to get the job to do the job we want to do. And the better the air and water movement in the soil, the less fertilizer we're going to need to put on, because we won't waste any. So I'll look at the soil test result, the nutrient component of it, then figure out what it is I'm going to grow. And part of that test, is testing for the soil organic matter as well. And really, if the soil organic matter is low, I almost have to think first, okay, well, how am I going to address that problem? And usually, how am I going to address that problem while I'm growing my cash crop? And that's where intercropping or green manure cropping or compost or some other form of getting more organic matter into the system is really important. So I haven't talked about any biological stimulants or anything like that, because you know, I think people get very excited about, you know, compost teas and all that kind of stuff. But if you haven't got the fundamentals in here, you can throw as much compost tea or as many bugs as you like in there, and they're just going to die. Because it's like saying, the desert needs more people. Let's put people into the desert, and they'll all die because there's no food or water there. right? So we can put all the bugs we like into this soil, but if the conditions aren't here for those bugs to proliferate and to prosper, we're wasting our time. So that's why it's important to kind of get our ducks lined up, understand what we need to put in place, and then we can maybe put on a compost tea or something else, and it will provide some benefit. Okay, how are we going?